Welcome back to Purpose Driven Church for Unificationists. We are finishing the chapter on preaching to the unchurched. Uh, the first part of the chapter, Rick Warren gave a lot of practical advice on how to improve the sermons, the preaching style, just really good practical guidance. And um, we're going to continue that, finishing that chapter. And first of all, he talks about preaching in series. So he says that a lot of pastors don't understand the value of momentum. The value of having a series is that you can create a lot of anticipation. You can announce your sermon topics ahead of time. You can build off of one topic from one week to the next week to the next week. People, if they know what you're going to be talking about ahead of time, they can look at the list of topics and be, oh, and they can be like, oh, the this topic would be good for my friend. And so he says that if you do it well, you can really leverage this to create a lot of anticipation in the community. He says they like to announce these series on days when there's a lot of guests because that gives them something to look forward to coming back to. And he says that 4 to 8 weeks is really the ideal. Any more than that is really too long, and people kind of lose attention at that point. He also says it's important to be consistent in your preaching style. He says um, you can't switch back and forth between seeker and believers in the same service. You have to focus on targeting one or the other. Um, for example, you shouldn't have a series on managing stress and then have a series on expository gems from Leviticus, or have a series on what God thinks about sex with unmasking the beast in Revelation. These topics and these series are geared towards different groups of people, and if you go back and forth like that, then it'll be very confusing for people, and people won't feel sure about when they should invite their friends, or even if they want to come themselves. Um, but he says that it's not that you can't talk about deeper themes if you have guests in your audience or if you're gearing your service towards guests. But he says that if you want to teach, um, growth themes for believers in a service that's also including guests, then you have to find a way to talk in a way that teaches these deeper principles, but in a way that anybody can understand, regardless of where they're at in their walk of faith. Um, he also says that you have to choose your guest speakers carefully. He says right now for them, they have like a staff, a pastoral staff. And so that's really advantageous for them because they, they know the people, the staff know the people, they love their people, and they know and use a style of preaching that's consistent with your philosophy of ministry. He says that especially when gearing towards guests or seekers or even people who are kind of somewhat skeptical, all it takes is one speaker to come in and give us a service that's not in line with your vision, or kind of reaffirms some of the suspicions that unchurched people might have about religion, and you'll lose those people. So um, he says the pastor's job is to protect the community from people coming in and doing something like that. And this is one of the reasons why Donia and I have been hesitant to bring in too many guest speakers, or if someone does want to give a guest sermon, that we screen them as much as possible beforehand. And this hasn't always been welcome. I remember we had one person who wanted to give a sermon, but he didn't want to tell us what he would be talking about. He said he always gives his sermons based off of inspiration. And eventually we let him speak, but I actually kind of regretted it, honestly, afterwards. And going forward, you know, it's for us, we're trying to cultivate an experience and certain expectation. People expect that when I go to Sunday service, it's going to be a good experience. I'm going to get something out of it. And so, in order to do that, especially because in the past it hasn't been that way many times, we have to create a new pattern and a new um, uh, expectation based off of past experience, that, oh, well, because the past sermons have been good, I know this is going to be good too. And you can't do that if you don't have a consistent style and understanding from the people who are speaking. He finishes up by talking a little bit about, how when you preach, you should expect that it's gonna reach people. Um, expect that people are looking for something, and they're looking for making a commitment. And so when you speak, you should expect that people are going to be, you know looking for something meaningful and valuable to get out of that message. They talk about the idea of having a separate room for people if they want to make a greater commitment. He says, I wouldn't call it like a counseling room or something that sounds like intimidating, but something kind of like a visitor center, a reception area, or something like that. That's what they ended up doing after a while. He talks a lot about altar calls. We don't do altar calls per se, but you know, one of the things that I was thinking about after as I was reading this is that, you know, for Christians, when they want to make a commitment to Christ, then they kind of many times they do an altar call, and they'll come up and they'll kind of publicly be anointed or say a prayer or something like that, and eventually they get baptized. And I was thinking, you know, this is a strong commitment that somebody makes. It's not an easy decision, but it's also not like a huge, like, you know, process through which somebody has to go through in order to consider themselves to be a Christian. And I was thinking for ourselves, we lack kind of intermediary steps. You know, we have the blessing, and we have got like a couple other things, and like now, you know, we're starting to do these pre-blessings, and you know, like in our local community, we have these, you know, membership. Uh, People can get up and they get a certificate. It affirms their membership in the local community. But it would not be a bad idea to have the other intermediary steps so people can say that, you know, I'm a member of this church, even if they haven't gone to the degree of, you know, going witnessing or fundraising or having gone to the blessing, for example. But he says, you know, he could write a whole book about this topic, but he says that fundamentally, even though they've made a lot of effort and had a lot of success with their seeker services and reaching unchurched people, he says the message is still the most important element of the seeker service, even though you have all these other aspects, music and so on and so forth. He says Saddleback's 15 years of growth in spite of hot gymnasiums, leaky tents, and crowded parking have shown that people will put up with a lot of inconveniences and limitations if the messages are genuinely meeting their needs. All right, that's all for this chapter, and tomorrow we'll start on the next section, part 5, building up the church. All right, thanks a lot.